What if the reason the United Nations can't seem to, permanently stop a war is simply because the diplomats drafting the treaties secretly hate themselves?
Wow. That is quite the opening
I
question.
know, I know. It sounds completely absurd on its face. We're totally conditioned to think of geopolitics as this grand objective chessboard.
Right. Yeah. Like it's all just math and borders.
Exactly. But today, we're doing a deep dive into a really radical framework. And it basically claims that our entire approach to global stability is just, well, it's a lie.
A very expensive lie, actually.
Yeah. This framework suggests that world peace is literally impossible. Like mathematically and structurally impossible, unless you, meaning the person listening to this right now, fix your own private internal psychological chaos first.
It's a profound pivot, isn't it? Because, we spend trillions of dollars and just endless diplomatic hours trying to build these massive external structures to contain human behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
We write complex constitutions, we form international coalitions, we build literal walls, and we just sort of assume that if the architecture of the law is strong enough, it will, somehow force the people living inside it to just be peaceful.
Right. It's like trying to build a gleaming, structurally perfect skyscraper out of bricks that are actively crumbling from the inside.
That's a great way to put it.
Because the blueprint for the building might be flawless, right? The engineering math might be perfect. But if the molecular bonds of the steel girders and the concrete are fundamentally stressed or shattered, the whole thing is just going to collapse.
Yeah, you simply cannot build a stable macroscopic system out of inherently unstable microscopic parts.
Which brings us to the actual material we're dissecting today. We are doing something highly unusual for this deep dive. We aren't doing, a broad survey of a thick historical biography or some sweeping scientific overview.
No, we are zooming way, way in today.
Right. We're looking at a single document called the Peaceful World Manifesto, version 1.0. But even more specifically than that, we're isolating just one dense, incredibly concentrated paragraph from it. Point number 39.
Just one point. But it is so dense.
It really is. The title of this section is The Strategy of Circles of Responsibility. And you, as the listener, might be thinking, why are we dedicating an entire deep dive to one paragraph of a manifesto?
It's a fair question.
Right. But it's because this single paragraph contains what the authors present as a master strategy for global change. It's a blueprint that draws a direct, unavoidable, and highly mechanical line between the chaos in the world and the chaos in your own mind. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
The manifesto introduces a concept that sits at the very center of this blueprint. They call it the Holarchy of Peace.
And the architecture of reality, according to this text anyway, relies entirely on that specific word. The manifesto states, "We build peace from the inside out, understanding reality as a holarchy." The term holarchy, which in the original Russian text is olokomaki, that is the absolute linchpin here.
So let's break that down for a second, because I think most people have probably never used the word holarchy in a casual conversation.
I definitely haven't, outside of, very specific academic contexts.
Right. We all know the word hierarchy intimately. We live in hierarchies. But this is fundamentally different.
What's fascinating here is how it requires a complete rewiring of how we visualize power and structure. So the text defines a holarchy as a system of nested holes, where each level relies on the previous one.
Nested holes.
Yeah. And to really grasp the mechanics of this, we kind of have to look at why we're so obsessed with hierarchies in the first place.
Okay, yeah. Walk us through that.
Well, in a standard hierarchy, think of like a corporate structure or
Yeah.
the military or just a traditional government. The structure operates like a pyramid.
Right, the classic pyramid shape.
Exactly. The power, the directives, the structural integrity theoretically flows from the top down. So the CEO or the general dictates the reality for all the layers beneath them.
So the people at the bottom are essentially just like load-bearing pillars for the people at the top. The strength of a hierarchy is supposedly in its capstone.
Yes, exactly. But a holarchy completely subverts that geometry. In a holarchy, structural integrity does not come from the top down. It grows from the inside out.
From the inside out. Right?
Every single level in a holarchy is a complete whole in and of itself, but it simultaneously acts as a foundational part of a larger whole.
Okay, so I was actually trying to visualize this earlier, and I kept coming back to those Russian matryoshka nesting dolls.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Because you have that tiny solid wooden doll in the absolute center, right? Then a slightly larger hollow doll encloses it. And a larger one encloses that all the way up to the beautifully painted outer doll that everyone actually sees when it, sits on a shelf.
The Matryoshka doll works beautifully here because it highlights the hidden vulnerability of the entire system.
Right, because if you look at a set of those dolls, the outer doll seems really robust, but it's hollow. It cannot hold its shape under pressure if the inner dolls are missing or crushed.
It would just cave in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If the core of the Matryoshka set is shattered, any external weight applied to the outside will just collapse the whole set inward. The perceived strength of the outer layer is derived completely, like 100%, from the solid physical presence of the layers nested inside it.
And if we apply that exact geometry to geopolitics, it flips the traditional script of world building completely upside down.
Because we usually think of it top down.
Right. We almost universally treat world peace as an external doll that we can just sort of manufacture and place over the chaos.
We think peace is a treaty signed in Geneva.
Exactly. We think it's a UN resolution. We view peace as an imposing structure mandated from the top layer of a hierarchy. But a holarchy dictates that peace can only grow from that center doll. The macro state of the world is nothing more than an emergent property of the microstates of the individuals who make it up.
I really want you, the listener, to just pause for a second and map your own life onto this geometry. Try to stop viewing your life as a ladder you're desperately trying to climb. That's the hierarchical view, right?
Right.
Instead, imagine your life as a series of concentric circles radiating outward from your own mind. You are the tiny, solid wooden doll in the center. Everything else, your immediate family, your career, your community, your nation, is a layer wrapped around you.
And the question is, what's supporting it?
Exactly. If you are hollow or fractured on the inside, what exactly is supporting the weight of the life you are trying to build around you?
That imagery leads directly into perhaps the most provocative and honestly challenging claim in this entire section. The text boldly asserts, and I'll quote it directly here, "It is impossible to build a peaceful society out of people living in an internal war."
People living in an internal war. That is a phrase that just stops you in your tracks.
It really does. And we need to spend some serious time figuring out what the authors actually mean by an internal war.
Because they don't just mean having a bad day, right?
No, not at all. This isn't just about experiencing a fleeting moment of stress or, having a frustrating Tuesday. It is pointing to a chronic, systemic psychological condition.
Okay, so what does it mean for a human being to literally be at war with themselves?
It is profound cognitive dissonance. It's the friction between your public persona and your private reality. It's unaddressed trauma, it's self-loathing, repressed anger, unresolved grief.
It's that feeling of waking up and immediately having to put on emotional body armor just to survive your own internal monologue, long before you even interact with another human being.
Exactly. Your mind is the battlefield. And when a mind is a battlefield, the nervous system is in a constant state of threat.
Like fight or flight.
Physiologically, yes. You're flooded with cortisol. You're in survival mode. Now, consider the mechanics of a holarchy we just talked about. If reality truly is a system of nested holes, and the foundational unit, the individual human, is fractured and vibrating with hostility, then the superstructure built on top of them will inherently be fractured and hostile.
Because the center doll is broken.
Right. You simply cannot extract peace from a system whose fundamental components are designed for war.
See, I am going to push back on this a little bit because it feels a bit, deterministic.
Yep. How so?
Well, I can hear a political scientist listening to this and saying, look, humans are messy. We are always going to have internal baggage. That's just part of being human. But that is exactly why we invent institutions, right?
That is the argument, yes.
Like, can't we just engineer incredibly robust laws to keep internally warring people in check? If the system of rules is tight enough, does it really matter if people are emotionally turbulent on the inside, as long as they behave peacefully on the outside?
It is the ultimate utopian temptation, isn't it? The belief that the perfect external system can somehow override the flawed internal human.
Yeah.
But let's play out your own skyscraper analogy from earlier. If the bricks are crumbling, no amount of brilliant architectural math can save the building. Let's look at it through a more specific lens, like a traffic system.
Okay, I like that.
Imagine a perfectly designed traffic system. The lanes are wide, the stoplights are perfectly timed, the speed limits are mathematically optimized for the absolute best flow. The blueprint is totally flawless.
Sounds like a dream.
Right. But every single driver behind the wheel in this system is currently having a severe panic attack, or is blinded by road rage, or is completely disassociated from reality.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The system fails immediately. People are running red lights, slamming on brakes, swerving into other lanes.
Exactly. The perfectly timed lights mean absolutely nothing because the individual units operating within the system are totally dysregulated.
They're fighting an internal war.
Precisely. And this mechanism really explains the cyclical failure of grand political revolutions throughout history.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Because they attempt to mandate peace or equality at the societal level.
The outer Matryoshka doll.
Right, the outer doll, while utterly ignoring the internal wars of the citizenry. You have a new government signing a glorious new constitution on behalf of millions of people who are deeply personally traumatized, aggrieved, and hostile.
The Constitution in that scenario is just a piece of paper resting on top of a psychological volcano.
Yeah.
And a holarchy dictates that the heat from the center will always eventually burn through the outer layers. The treaties will be violated, the laws will be manipulated, the peace will dissolve.
Because the people enforcing the laws and the people subject to the laws are still fighting their internal wars. And that conflict will inevitably seek an external theater.
Exactly. It always leaks out.
So if top-down mandates are physically incapable of producing lasting peace, and the internal state is the absolute foundation, how does this manifesto propose we actually build a stable world?
Well, this is where the text gets highly structured.
Yeah.
Point 39 lays out 5 specific sequential levels of responsibility, the 5 rings of the holarchy, basically.
Okay, so let's walk through them. Let's start at the very center, level 1. The text defines this as, and I'm quoting inner integrity.
The deliberate choice of the word integrity is vital to understanding the mechanics here. Because in everyday conversation, we tend to moralize that word, don't we?
Oh, totally. We use integrity to mean honesty or ethical behavior.
Yeah.
We say someone has integrity if they, find a lost wallet and return it.
Right, we treat it as a character trait on a performance review.
Yeah, exactly.
But the root of the word from the Latin integer means whole, complete, or undivided. It's the exact same root used in mathematics for a whole number.
An integer.
Right. And in structural engineering, we talk about the structural integrity of an airplane wing or the hull of a submarine.
And when you talk about the integrity of a submarine hull, you clearly aren't talking about its morals. You're talking about its ability to withstand massive external pressure without cracking. It just means the material isn't divided against itself.
That is the exact mechanism being described in the Manifesto. Inner integrity is the literal structural opposite of the internal war.
Okay, so it means your thoughts, your values, and your actions are aligned into a cohesive unit. You are not fragmented by cognitive dissonance.
Yes, you are a whole sound individual capable of withstanding the pressures of existence without shattering, and this is the key part, hurting the people around you.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, because this document is basically upending everything. It is taking personal mental health, going to therapy, processing your childhood trauma, learning emotional regulation, or simply figuring out how to stop hating yourself.
Right.
And it is completely removing it from the category of private, selfish wellness. It is reframing your psychological healing as the fundamental, non-negotiable first step of geopolitical peace building.
It's wild, isn't it? It demands that we view psychological wholeness not as a luxury, but as a civic duty.
Yes. It presents this massive paradox. To save the world, the manifesto says you must first selfishly secure your own psychological boundaries.
Because if you don't,
If you do not do the hard work of achieving inner integrity, you are actively a liability to the peace of your community and your country. You are an unstable structural element.
exactly. Because without level 1 integrity, any stress applied to your life will cause you to fracture. And the shrapnel from your internal explosion will rip into the people closest to you. The trauma will travel upward into the next level of the system.
I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second, because this framework strips away a lot of our excuses. It asks a really uncomfortable question.
It really does.
What does your inner integrity look like right now, today? Are you undivided? Or are you secretly fighting a massive internal war, just bleeding energy every day to mask it from your coworkers and your family?
Are you a solid foundation?
Right. Or are you leaking your own unaddressed chaos into the room every time you walk in? Because according to point 39, your answer to that question is the exact ceiling of your contribution to world peace. You cannot give what you do not structurally possess.
And that concept of leaking chaos brings us right to the necessary transition point. The holarchy is a dynamic system. Energy doesn't stay static.
It moves outward.
Yes, once you have established your inner integrity, or conversely, once you have failed to establish it and are leaking your internal war, that energy immediately radiates outward to the very next layer of reality.
Which brings us to the second ring. The manifesto identifies level 2 as we, peace, and the family.
The family, the immediate, intimate we.
And we really have to ask why the family is specifically designated as the second layer. Like, why not your immediate neighborhood or your friend group or the city?
Because the family unit is the absolute first, most inescapable friction point with the other.
Oh, that makes sense. The family is essentially the proving ground.
It is the ultimate diagnostic test of your level 1 integrity. The family is where the theoretical peace of the individual violently collides with the messy reality of other humans.
I'm actually laughing because it's just so true. Like, it is incredibly easy to feel like a deeply integrated, peaceful person when you are sitting alone in your apartment, reading a philosophy book or, meditating in a quiet room.
Oh, sure. You feel like a Zen master.
You completely feel like a Zen master. You think, oh, I've conquered level 1, but then you visit your parents for the holidays. Or your toddler throws a massive tantrum in the middle of a grocery store. Or your spouse makes just a passing comment about the way you load the dishwasher.
And suddenly the Zen master evaporates.
Completely evaporates. Gone. The immediate visceral test of your inner wholeness is whether you can maintain that structural integrity when you are dealing with the people who have known you the longest.
The people who know exactly where all your psychological tripwires are buried.
Exactly.
If your inner peace only exists in isolation, it isn't integrity. It's just isolation.
Wow.
If you claim to have resolved your internal war, but the moment your teenager rolls their eyes at you, you resort to shouting or emotional manipulation or just shutting down entirely, then you haven't actually achieved level 1. You are just taking a temporary ceasefire between battles.
So what is the mechanism of transmission here? Like, how exactly does an internal war manifest as a family war?
Through projection and emotional dysregulation. See, when a person lacks inner integrity, they literally cannot tolerate internal discomfort.
It's too painful.
Right. So when a family member triggers a feeling of, say, inadequacy or fear, the fractured individual cannot process it internally. They must export it. They project their own unresolved chaos onto their spouse or their child.
Because they can't contain it.
Exactly. They attempt to violently control the external environment of the home because they cannot control their internal environment.
It makes me think about authoritarian parenting styles. Like, a parent who rules a household purely through fear and physical intimidation might actually think they've established a peaceful home just because the children are quiet and obedient.
Oh, absolutely. But a holarchic view would say that is a complete illusion.
The parent is just outsourcing their internal war onto the nervous systems of their children. The family isn't peaceful, it's occupied territory.
That is a terrifyingly accurate way to describe it. Occupied territory. And the manifesto is making a very pointed sociological observation here, too. The family unit acts as the primary laboratory for human governance.
A laboratory for governance, meaning what exactly?
It is where we first learn the actual mechanics of power, the negotiation of shared resources, and the methods for resolving disputes.
Oh, I see. So if a child is raised in a level 2 environment that is governed by coercion, emotional blackmail, and warfare, they are being fundamentally programmed with those specific tools.
Exactly. And how can we possibly expect a generation of people raised in occupied territories to magically grow up and successfully negotiate international border disputes without resorting to missiles?
We can't. The Holarchy dictates that the family level relies completely, 100%, on the inner integrity level. The state of the global macrocosm is directly downstream from the emotional health of the dinner table.
Okay, so we secure the I, the inner self, which then allows us to structurally support the we, the family unit. Now the energy radiates outward again, crossing the boundary from the private sphere into the public sphere.
The third ring.
We hit the third ring, level 3. The manifesto defines this as deed, service through labor. And in parentheses, it clarifies this simply as profession.
This is a really critical juncture in the text, and it requires us to dig into the wording. Notice that the manifesto doesn't just say employment or economic participation. It frames the act of going to work specifically as service through labor.
Okay, I can hear a lot of listeners groaning right now. Let's be incredibly real for a second. We don't live in a utopia, right?
No, we certainly do not. A huge portion of the global workforce is stuck in exhausting, repetitive, often soul-crushing jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. I mean, they're entering data into spreadsheets that no one reads, they're working drive thrusts, they're stocking warehouse shelves at 3 in the morning.
Right.
How does a manifesto dare to tell someone working a minimum wage shift that their labor is supposed to be a service that generates world peace? Isn't that just romanticizing economic exploitation?
It's a crucial challenge to raise, and I'm glad you brought it up, because it's interpreted superficially. Service through labor sounds exactly like a corporate motivational poster designed to make you work harder for less pay.
Right, like we're a family here.
Exactly. But we have to analyze this within the strict mechanics of the holarchy we've been discussing. The deed is positioned as the transmission belt between the private wholeness you've built in levels 1 and 2 and the broader society you are stepping into at level 4.
The transmission belt. Okay, explain how that works in reality.
Well, the manifesto isn't making a statement about what your job title must be. It doesn't care if you're a CEO or a barista. It is making a profound statement about the orientation of your energy while you are doing it.
The orientation.
Yes. We need to contrast the two primary orientations of labor, the extractive model and the service model.
Let's define the extractive model first, because I think that's the one most of us are familiar with.
It is. The extractive model is a direct continuation of the internal war. When a fractured person enters the economy, they view work entirely as an adversarial, zero-sum game. Their orientation is, how much value can I extract from this company, this client, or this transaction, while giving the absolute minimum of myself?
Or looking at it from the corporate side, the orientation is, how much labor can I extract from this employee before they burn out and I just have to replace them?
Exactly. When the orientation is extractive, the marketplace becomes a literal battlefield. Every transaction is a micro-conflict. This breeds structural violence, distrust, and resentment.
It's an internal war exported to the office.
Precisely. But the manifesto suggests that if a person has truly achieved inner integrity and family peace, they bring a completely different orientation to the public square. They don't need to use their job to soothe their ego or dominate others because their ego is already secure.
Right. They're already whole.
Therefore, their orientation naturally shifts toward service.
So it's not necessarily about like curing a rare disease or negotiating a peace treaty at work. It's about the energetic posture you hold while doing ordinary things.
Exactly. Think about a data analyst. An extractive data analyst manipulates the numbers to make their department look good, hiding flaws to secure a bonus, actively sabotaging the long-term health of the company for short-term gain. They are exporting their internal war into the corporate structure.
But a service-oriented data analyst.
A service-oriented analyst ensures the absolute integrity of the data. They see their spreadsheet not as a meaningless chore, but as a crucial component of a larger system. By providing accurate truth, they are serving the organizational whole.
What about the person working the drive-thru?
Same thing. They aren't just handing over a bag of food. If they operate from service, they are providing sustenance, efficiency, and perhaps a moment of genuine human warmth to another node in the holarchy.
Oh, I see the mechanism now. Your profession is simply the vehicle. It is the syringe through which you inject your internal state into the bloodstream of society.
That's a great metaphor.
Right. Because if you are toxic, your labor pollutes the economy. If you are whole, your labor nourishes it.
And if enough people operate from an orientation of service, the entire economic engine transforms. It changes from an arena of exploitation into a massive collaborative network of mutual support.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the emergence of the fourth ring. We have tracked the energy from the mind to the home to the marketplace. Now that collective energy forms level 4.
The societal level.
Right. The manifesto calls this society, justice of laws. And it associates it with the polis, the ancient Greek concept of the body of citizens.
The macro-political level. This is where we finally talk about governments, constitutions, and justice. And the most glaring, brilliant thing about this blueprint is where this level is located.
Justice of laws is level 4. It's not level 1.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, its placement is a profound rejection of almost all modern political theory.
It really is. I mean, think about every political campaign you have ever witnessed in your life. Think about every activist movement. The underlying assumption is almost always that the law is the starting point.
They treat the law as level one.
Exactly. The belief is always if we can just capture the halls of power, if we can just write the perfect just legislation and force it onto the books, then society will finally become peaceful and equitable.
They are trying to engineer the society from the outside in.
Right.
They believe the blueprint creates the material.
But point 39 says the exact opposite. It implies that you literally cannot legislate a just society into existence. The law is not the engine of justice. The law is merely a mirror.
We have to introduce the concept of an emergent property here because it explains this perfectly. In complex systems theory, an emergent property is a characteristic that a complex system possesses, but which the individual parts do not.
Okay, can you give me an analogy for that? Because emergent properties can be a bit abstract.
Sure. Think of a flock of starlings performing a murmuration. You know, those massive, sweeping, beautifully coordinated clouds of birds in the sky.
Oh yeah, they're incredible to watch, like a fluid dance.
Exactly. Now, you cannot dissect a single starling and find the murmuration code inside it. A single bird does not possess the property of a flock.
Right.
That breathtaking coordinated movement is an emergent property. It only happens when thousands of individual birds follow very simple, localized rules of interaction with their immediate neighbors.
Oh, that is a brilliant way to look at it. You can't build the flock from the top down. You can't appoint a CEO bird to direct the traffic and tell everyone where to fly.
You can't. And in this holarchy, just laws are the murmuration. Societal justice is an emergent property of the three rings beneath it. You don't build a just society by drafting a perfect constitution. You build it by fostering a population that has achieved inner integrity, built peaceful families, and operates an economy based on mutual service.
And what kind of laws would a population like that write?
They wouldn't even have to try to write just laws. They would write laws that naturally reflect their internal state. The legislation would organically be equitable, rehabilitative, and peaceful simply because the people drafting and voting on the laws literally do not understand how to operate through coercion or exploitation.
The dark reverse of this is equally true, though, and I think it explains so much of our current geopolitical frustration.
How so?
Well, if the lower rings of the holarchy are corrupt, if the population is deeply traumatized and at war with themselves, if domestic violence and emotional abuse are rampant in the family unit, and if the economy is just this ruthless, extractive battleground,
Right.
what kind of laws will emerge from that system?
The laws will inevitably be unjust, punitive, and corrupt. And it won't matter what beautiful promises a politician makes on a debate stage. Not at all. If a society elects a leader from a broken holarchy, that leader will simply encode the internal war into the legal system. A society of fractured people will always generate a fractured state.
It is a devastatingly clarifying diagnostic tool. It means that when we look at systemic injustice in our legal systems, we aren't just looking at a failure of policy. We are looking at a glaring symptom of a level 1, level 2, and level 3 breakdown.
Exactly. You cannot permanently fix a level 4 problem using only level 4 solutions.
Right. If the laws are cruel, you have to trace the rot all the way down the holarchy. You have to ask, why is the workplace toxic? Why are our families dissolving? Why are our individuals in so much pain?
It places the burden of societal justice squarely back onto the daily life of the individual. You cannot outsource your civic duty to a politician. If you are a tyrant at the dinner table or an exploiter in the office, you are actively drafting unjust laws with your behavior.
Okay, so we have reached the edge of human civilization in this model. But there is one final ring. The ultimate, all-encompassing, nested whole. Level 5, the Manifesto calls this. Planet, harmony with life, the biosphere.
The transition in scale from level 1 to level 5 is just breathtaking.
It is genuinely awe-inspiring. Think about where we started this conversation. We were microscopically focused on the invisible, silent cognitive dissonance inside a single human mind.
And following this strict mechanical, logical progression, we have expanded outward to encompass the entire planetary ecosystem.
And we must pay close attention to the specific phrasing the authors use here, harmony with life.
Yes.
The Manifesto does not say sustainable resource management. It does not say environmental conservation. It does not frame the planet as a warehouse of materials that we need to be, like, slightly more polite about looting.
Right. It uses the word harmony. It implies a musical integration. It implies playing an instrument as part of a much larger orchestra rather than demanding to be the conductor.
Which is how we usually act.
Exactly. In the traditional hierarchical model of reality, human beings place themselves at the absolute top of the pyramid. We look down at the planet as something beneath us, a subordinate layer to be dominated and extracted from.
But in the holarchy, the geometry flips again. The biosphere is the ultimate outer ring. We are not on top of it, we are nested inside it.
Like the Matryoshka doll again. The Earth is the massive outer doll. We are the smaller dolls vibrating inside of it. If we expand too aggressively, if we swell with ego and extraction, we literally crack the outer shell that contains us.
And here we find the profound ecological conclusion of point 39. It suggests that the ecological crisis, the pollution, the deforestation, the climate instability is not merely a technological failure or a lack of green policy.
No.
It is the ultimate tragic macro expression of our collective internal war.
Connect those dots for me. How does my unaddressed trauma cause a forest to be clear-cut?
Well, when humans lack inner integrity, they experience a profound internal emptiness and anxiety. Because they cannot soothe this anxiety internally, they attempt to soothe it externally.
Right, through consumption.
Yes. This drives hyperconsumption. We devour products, energy, and land in a desperate, futile attempt to fill a psychological void. The extractive economy of level 3 goes into overdrive to feed this consumption, which requires tearing up the biosphere.
We're literally waging war on the environment to self-medicate our own internal chaos.
Exactly. But if the vector of the holarchy functions correctly, if individuals are whole and content, if families provide deep emotional fulfillment, if the economy is focused on necessary service rather than endless extraction, the human species naturally ceases to be a destructive parasitic virus on the host planet.
We don't have to force ourselves to be green through punitive carbon taxes. We simply lose the psychological appetite for destruction. We automatically settle into a harmonious, integrated rhythm with the biosphere.
Which brings us to the concluding mathematical formula of point 39, because the manifesto doesn't just list these 5 levels and hope you get the point. It binds them together with a strict directive.
Yes, the vector.
The text concludes with this line: vector of work. I, arrow, we, arrow, deed, arrow, society, arrow, planet.
The vector of work. We really have to focus intensely on those arrows. In physics and mathematics, a vector is a quantity that possesses both magnitude and a specific direction.
The arrows in this manifesto are not mere bullet points.
No, they represent a rigid, unyielding flow of energy and responsibility.
So what does this all mean? The flow only goes one way, from the micro to the macro, from the inside out.
The absolute most critical takeaway from this entire framework is this: you cannot violate the vector, you cannot reverse the arrows.
Let me try to visualize this for a listener. Imagine a perfectly still, quiet pond. You hold a stone and you drop it directly into the center. That initial impact where the stone breaks the water is the eye level.
Right.
The energy immediately creates a tight, intense ring right around the impact point, the we, the family. That ring pushes outward to create the next ripple, the deed, the workplace, which pushes outward to create society, which eventually ripples all the way to the farthest muddy shore of the pond, the planet.
The energy transfer is entirely sequential and entirely reliant on that initial impact.
Now, imagine the absurdity of trying to reverse that physics. Imagine standing at the edge of the pond, ankle deep in the mud, and trying to use your hands to manipulate the outermost ripple.
It's impossible.
You are frantically splashing the water at the shore, trying to force a perfectly formed ripple to travel backwards into the center of the pond, all while completely ignoring the fact that someone is standing in the middle of the pond repeatedly smashing the water with the baseball bat.
It is physical absurdity. It is the definition of futility.
And yet that is precisely how we attempt to solve the crises of the modern world.
We are totally obsessed with working backwards.
We hold massive, glittering global climate summits in Paris or Dubai to mandate harmony with the biosphere level 5. But the nations attending those summits are entirely composed of societies operating under unjust, polarized laws level 4.
And those societies are driven by ruthless, extractive economic engines level 3.
Which are fueled by the labor of dissolving, alienated families level 2.
Which are made up of deeply traumatized, dysregulated individuals, level 1.
We are frantically splashing at the edge of the pond. We are trying to impose harmony on the biosphere while actively neglecting the internal war raging in our own minds. And point 39 of the manifesto is basically standing there, pointing at the vector and saying, stop.
Stop. You are wasting your time. You are violating the physics of human societal development. The vector only flows one way.
If you want to change the outermost wing of reality, you have absolutely no choice but to start at the center. You must secure the base of the holarchy. You have to fix yourself.
It is a really daunting realization because it removes all of our convenient scapegoats. You can no longer blame the politicians or the billionaires or the system for the state of the world without first taking a brutal inventory of your own psychological structural integrity.
We need to take a breath here because the sheer scope of what we just covered is staggering. Let's try to synthesize this journey.
Yeah, let's recap.
We started with just a few lines of text from version 1.0 of the Peaceful World Manifesto, a concept called the Holarchy of Peace. And by carefully following the logic of the text, we traced a continuous, unbroken chain of causality from the darkest, most private corners of a single person's unhealed trauma, all the way up to the existential fate of the planetary biosphere.
It is an absolute masterclass in conceptual architecture. It entirely dismantles the pervasive myth that world peace is a macro problem requiring macro solutions.
Right.
It proves, structurally, that global harmony is fundamentally and inescapably dependent on the personal, psychological state of the individual citizen.
It makes world peace a deeply, uncomfortably personal responsibility. You cannot build a stable skyscraper with crumbling bricks, and you cannot build a peaceful planet with warring minds.
There are no legislative shortcuts. You cannot skip level one.
The Holarchy demands that we become architects of our own internal space before we presume to design the world.
That's incredibly well said.
Which leaves us with a lingering and perhaps highly confrontational final thought for you, the listener. Something I want you to genuinely mull over as you turn this off and step back into the reality of your day.
What's thought?
If this manifesto is right, if reality truly is a system of nested holes, and if your own internal state is the foundational stone dropped into the pond, what exactly is the ripple you are sending out into the world right now?
That's the question.
When you walk into your kitchen to talk to your family, when you log on to your next stressful work meeting, when you vote in your next local election, are you radiating the inner integrity required to sustain a peaceful world? Or, if you strip away all the excuses and look at yourself with brutal honesty, are you just exporting your own internal war?
That is the only question that actually matters if we want to survive.
It truly is. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly intense, focused deep dive today. We hope this framework gave you a radical new lens through which to view your own power and your own responsibility in the world. Take a deep breath, check your inner integrity, and we will see you next time.